Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. I will hand over now to Moline, and she can moderate this session.
Okay, so thank you and my apologies for that. Let's quickly start the session. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Moline and welcome to the second day of our virtual conference. So before we start, I just want to draw your attention to the chat box on your screen where relevant links will be posted, and also attendees who have opted for CPD points. Information on how to register and secure these points will be on the website. And also note that all sessions will be recorded and available for 1 year. So I would like to introduce you to our presenters for this session. So following each presentation, we will have 5 minutes for questions from the audience. If you would like to submit a question for any of the presenters, please type it out in the Q&A box. I'll then share the question with the presenter at the end. So I would like to present our first presenter. Our first presenter is Wilson. Wilson is a PhD candidate in health and rehabilitation studies at Stellenbosch University. He holds a master's degree in disability studies from the University of Western of Cape Town, and his research area of interest is on disability and migration. And his PhD title is Disability and Migration, a photo voice study of the lived experience of Zimbabwean refugee mothers of disabled children in the Western Cape province of South Africa. Over to you, Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank you to all those who are attending. The title of my presentation is a photo voice study on the lived experience of Zimbabwean refugee mothers of disabled children in the Western Cape province of South Africa. And if we look from the 21st century, Zimbabweans moving into South Africa have been actually recorded quite extensively due to the economic and political disaster in their country. Next slide. Globally, the rights of refugees and people living with disabilities are actually violated each and every day, leaving them exposed to trauma, including physical, sexual, and mental abuse. And the recent studies focusing on refugee populations have paid attention on refugee rights. Next slide. For the past 4 decades, news media have actually reported on Zimbabweans fleeing their countries to neighboring countries, especially into South Africa. And what we know is 3.4 million Zimbabweans are living outside their country. And we know more about Zimbabweans who are living in South Africa, but we know less about the refugee mothers of children living with disabilities in South Africa. Next slide. So from the table, actually from the table that you see on the screen, there are 16 countries, and of the 16 countries, Zimbabwe is actually on this level number 16. That graph was actually extracted from PASOB, which is non-profit organization that deals with refugees, asylum seekers. So you can see that in the Western Cape province, we have got mothers who are living with disabilities, but Zimbabweans actually top the list. And my research questions for this study, actually, the main research question is that what are the lived experience of Zimbabwean refugee mothers of children living with disabilities in the Western Cape province? And the sub-questions focused on the 3 migratory phases, which is the time when these mothers were in Zimbabwe, during transmigration, and in South Africa. What we know from the literature is that Zimbabweans have been actually migrating and are still going to South Africa from the past 4 decades. And according to the Zim statistics 2022, there are 773 1,246 Zimbabweans who are living in South Africa, of which 461,293 are men and 311,593 are women. So this estimates raises questions as to why Zimbabweans are fleeing from their country to other countries. But it seems like South Africa's seemingly stable economy and politics attracted many Zimbabweans with the belief of a better life. However, there is still lack of research on refugee mothers of children living with disabilities. And a recent study that was done by PASOP, which is a non-profit organization dealing with migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in the Western Cape province, actually shows us there are a number of refugee mothers of children living with disabilities who are coming to South Africa from Zimbabwe compared to the ordinary refugees who are coming to South Africa. So this actually leaves us with a lot of questions as to why these mothers actually risk going to South Africa, which is a country known for its hostility towards the foreign nationals. This study also is divided into 3 phases, as I said before: pre-migration, transmigration, and post-migrations. And these phases actually have got different challenges actually that these mothers encountered. Research methodology of this study is situated in the critical emancipatory paradigm, where it seeks to promote and empower social justice and improve the values of the people. So I also use the descriptive phenomenology. As we know, phenomenology deals with the experience of people. So in this case, I used it so that I described the experiences of these mothers from the way they were in Zimbabwe and on their journey and while they were in South Africa. I used photo, voice, and narratives to gather my data. So mothers actually used their smartphones to take the photos, which they later bring to the researcher to present and narrate the stories. In sampling method, I used the volunteer method in sampling my method, whereby an advert was put in the notice board of PASOP through a social worker, and mothers who were eligible and also willing to take part in the study were actually encouraged to do so. On data analysis, I used 6 reflective stages of thematic analysis by Brown and Clerk, which is the familiarization with my data, coding, generating initial themes, reviewing themes, and defining and naming themes, then the write-up. The study's trustworthiness. Trustworthiness was ensured through a triangulation: consistency, neutrality, truth, value, applicability, credibility, transferability, confiability, and dependability was accomplished through liaising with various refugee experts at PASOP and the interviews with 12 mothers of Zimbabwean refugee mothers, use of memos and field notes. Ethical consideration were actually adhered to. I gave the mothers the consent form, the informed consent form, and confidentiality was also adhered to through the use of pseudonyms, where we didn't actually use the names, the real names of the mothers, and protection from harm was also adhered to. So I'm moving to the finding section, and the finding section of this study is actually divided into 3 phases of migration, which is pre-migration, transmigration, and post-migration.
Wilson, if I can quickly stop you there, I just want to make sure that I'm on the right slides, because I'm not sure you haven't.
I'm on slides. I'm on slide 17.
Sheesh, yeah. Okay, you must please tell me to go to the next slide.
Because I could see you. Okay, so I'm on slide 17 on pre-migration phases. Okay, thank you. So this is the first phase on the migration of these mothers. So this phase is divided into, actually it has 4 themes, as you can see on the screen. And the first theme is grappling with the traditional beliefs, which is slide 18, grappling with traditional beliefs on causes of child disability in Zimbabwe. So the community in Zimbabwe, actually, according to these mothers, they believed that the causes of the disability of their children was actually supernatural, in the sense that it was either the ancestors or God who were punishing the mothers for certain actions that they have done. Next slide. So the suspected actions that these mothers were actually being blamed to have done was, maybe it was because the mother was having extramarital affairs or was involved in witchcraft activities, or the mother was have failed to follow traditional healers' instructions, or leaving the shoes outside the bedroom. So those were some of the actions that the mother was actually blamed of having done for her to get to birth a disabled child. Next slide. And there were also other causes, like maybe it was because there was a disability running in the mother's side, or there was an albino who was born in the mother's family, or there were twins who were born in the mother's family and one twin was not killed. And also disability is contagious, that when the mother was actually, during the pregnancy of the mother, maybe she saw somebody who was disabled and hence the child is disabled. Next slide. Disabled children as causes of misfortune. So whatever was happening in the community, be it drought, accidents, or death, that was actually associated with the child with a disability. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the next slide actually speaks on the elimination of the disability of the child. Because the child disability was associated with shame. So the community and the family members, they will do whatever it takes to remove the disability on the child. So they will use Mushangura tree to cure the disability of the child, the use of Muzimbani, and also making the child and the mother to sit on the sun, and the use of hot roundness to cure the disability, and taking donkey urine to cure the disability of the child, hitting the mother's forehead with a shoe, or taking menstruation blood to cure the disability of the child, and the use of river falls to cure the disability of the child, the use of nyungu. So these were actually horrible methods that were actually used to cure the child disability. Next slide, please. So the next slide is actually on the consequences of giving birth to, I think you jumped the other slide. So the consequence of giving birth to a disabled child. So mothers actually would face different consequences or different challenges. Like they were punished through hard labor, and they were also verbal abused and physical abused. And mothers would actually be denied to participate in family matters, community activities, clinics, and even at the church. Next slide. Mothers would actually lose support from the family members, the community, and the traditional leaders. Next slide. And mothers were actually rejected by family members, traditional communities, and community leaders, and the church. And finally, mothers would actually be divorced. Next slide. The next slide actually speaks on the transmigration, which are the lived experience of these mothers on their way to South Africa. So the following experience make up the themes of this phase. So traveling with a disabled child, mothers actually face challenges, and also traveling without legal document. Next slide. So traveling with a disabled child, mothers actually face different challenges. The first challenge was they would actually struggle to get transport to come to South Africa. And when they get the transport, they will pay more for the disabled child. And also there was a stigma associated with the disability of the child during their journey to South Africa. And at times they were ridiculed and questioned for traveling with a disabled child. Next slide.
Wilson, just to point out, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So as I've said, so those were some of the challenges that they faced without traveling without legal documents. So long routes and also going through the Limpopo River and bribing the law enforcement. So mothers in South Africa, actually, next slide, post-migration, they faced discrimination and they faced xenophobia. Discrimination at the health services, discrimination at the South African Social Security Agency Department, which is the SASA, and discrimination against at the Department of Home Affairs. And also mothers experience xenophobia in the communities that they reside. Next slide, which is the conclusion. So the main conclusion of this qualitative descriptive phenomenological study are drawn from their three phases of migration, which is the pre, trans, and their post-migration. And this study is hoped to support humanitarian and social services to improve the lived experience of refugee mothers of disabled children. Next slide, which is on recommendations, slide 32. So on a personal level in Zimbabwe, mothers are actually recommended to form support groups so that they can support each other to fight discrimination in their communities. And at community level, based intervention, the headmen and the traditional leaders are actually encouraged to come together and understand the challenge that these mothers are going through on a daily basis. On political level, we recommend that the Zimbabwean government actually have laws and policies that actually deals with the challenge that mothers of disabled children in that country actually go through. And on personal level in South Africa, we still encourage and recommend that mothers still have these support groups to fight their rights and the rights of their disabled children in South Africa. And on the community level, we recommend that the street committees or the community that these mothers actually reside understand the challenge that these mothers are actually going through. And on political level, South Africa must also have laws that protects and assist these mothers whenever they are facing challenges in their communities or when they are seeking basic services. The Home Affairs, which is the last slide, 33, the Home Affairs and the Department of Health must actually work together in assisting these mothers, especially the health facilities, to get services. And with regard to the police, they must actually be taught to deal on how to deal with these refugee mothers of children with disabilities. With regard to researchers, there is more research that is needed in the area of mothers of disabled children. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wilson, for the great presentation. It's quite migration also in a vulnerable population is quite a relevant topic. At the moment, I don't see any questions. Please, if you do have questions for Wilson, please share on the chat box. So from my side, I just want to ask Wilson, with these mothers, how representative are they to the general population of Zimbabwe? I was just looking at the experiences, the perceptions, especially the traditional beliefs. So how representative are these mothers to the general population? What sort of group do you think it's a sort of different group of mothers from the general population? Yeah, thank you.
So thank you so much for the question. And so what we've actually realized recently is there are actually at the moment like a number of these mothers actually moving from Zimbabwe coming to South Africa due to the traditional beliefs in Zimbabwe that maybe if there is drought, they are actually victimized for having actually given birth to their disabled children, or if there are accidents or any other misfortune that happens, they will actually be attacked or abused. So we've actually seen recently that there is a spike of these mothers coming to South Africa where they believe actually they could do actually better themselves and their children running away from Zimbabwe. So there are quite actually a number of these mothers at the moment. And actually, as if you go to slide 5, where I actually put the diagram showing different countries who are in the Western Cape province, and where the mothers actually have got disabled children. And if you see on number 16, the number of Zimbabweans with a disabled child, actually their number is very high compared to other countries.
Okay, thank you, Wilson. Then there's another question in the chat. How is the access to special needs services in South Africa for these migrant special needs children?
Yeah, it's actually, thank you so much for that question. It's actually very, very challenging for them to access services. For instance, if they go to the clinics and at times they are asked to produce the refugee status, of which at times it takes time for them to get those refugee status at the Department of Home Affairs. So when they go to the clinics, at times they don't have those documents with them, but they would actually want themselves or their kids to be treated or to get medication or to be assisted, and it would be very, very difficult. And on the other hand, very few of the 12 participants in my study, all of them, they are eligible to get the social disability grant for their children, but none of them are currently receiving that service from the Department of the social the social grant department. So it's actually very, very difficult for them to access certain services. At the Home Affairs, they are actually supposed to come there with their children, and at times there are complications and difficulties for them to get those documents at once. At times they will take almost 2, 3, 4 months without getting those documents, which actually leaves them actually in a difficult position. And at times they are arrested because they don't have those documents, deported or detained. So it's very, very difficult and challenging.
Okay, great questions. And I'm sure these questions will help you as you continue with your PhD. Then I think let's look at the last question. Could you say they come to South Africa as asylum seekers due to the threats against the disabled children? Is this recognized as a valid reason at Home Affairs?
You see, when they come to South Africa, they come because they are fleeing from the traditional beliefs that actually persecute them and their children. They are actually discriminated against, they are isolated, they are rejected by the community. So coming to South Africa, they're actually seeking to better their life and to seek asylum. However, at the Home Affairs, it is actually very challenging for them to understand that somebody can actually run away from his or her country because the child is disabled and because that person is facing challenges in the country. But for me, I think it is really a valid reason for somebody to flee, because if you look at the torture and the discrimination and the persecution, so that actually amounts to somebody to be recognized as a refugee. If you look at the definition of who qualifies to be a refugee, according to the United Nations, the 1951 definition of a refugee, so it deals with somebody must actually have reasons like persecution and torture from the country and being afraid to go back to that country. So I think these mothers actually fit to be in a category where they can be given asylum and later given a refugee status.
Okay. Another question. What is needed in Zimbabwe to improve access to service for these women and their children, given the immense challenges Zimbabwe's health system is facing?
You see, we understand that in Zimbabwe, the economic part of Zimbabwe the economy of Zimbabwe is actually dwindling each and every day. And the economic, the health sector is also going down by day. So what actually needs to be done is the mothers or people who are living with disabilities, the country must actually have a policy for instance, what is actually happening in South Africa, where those who are living with the disabilities are actually assisted, because for the meantime, there is no income or any service that is actually done income wise to assist people who are living with the disabilities, or these mothers who are living with the disabilities in Zimbabwe. So if there is such a program that will actually assist these mothers, I think that would be a very good thing for these mothers.
Okay, maybe let's take this one as the last question because of time. What about access to special needs schools in South Africa? Just briefly, can you respond to that?
Okay, at times it's very difficult, because even if you look at even South African themselves, at times they also put in on a list. So for refugees and asylum seekers who are also coming from other countries, especially in this case from Zimbabwe, it will actually take time for them actually to be enrolled at special schools, making it very, very difficult for them to attend a school at a proper age, because you'd find somebody who was supposed to attend school maybe 9 years or end up actually going to that grade when he or she is 12 years. So it's very, very challenging.
Okay, thanks, Wilson, for this insightful presentation. And I think these are great questions. I would suggest if you can save these questions, they'll help you structure your PhD as you go along your PhD journey. Thank you so much. So next we are going to move to our next presenter. Our next presenter is James. Is looking at sustainable development initiatives in Haiti, how we have trained and built a rehabilitation workforce in a low-income country. James, I checked your biography. Maybe you can, as you start your presentation, maybe just give a brief background about yourself. I checked you just mentioned that you love reading as it helps you stay connected with the world because you make knowledge. Knowledge is your canvas. Thank you. Over to James.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you. Go ahead. Please also people add questions for James in the Q&A session chat. Thank you. Go ahead,
Okay,
James.
thank you so much. As I said before, good evening, everyone. My name is James Antoine. Actually, I live in Haiti, and I'm working at my old school faculté des sciences de réhabilitation de l'organe. I'm a physical therapist right now, and I'm working to as assistant in affaires academic and assistant teacher. But that's all about me. But for the I do a pre-recording, but I don't know if me to share the video or
I'm 100% ready to share the video as soon as you're ready.
okay, thank you. But it's a very pleasure to here to present the rehabilitation and we build the rehabilitation in AD. It's very difficult for us, but it's a pleasure to present or we build rehabilitation. Thank you so much.
Um, can you hear me?
Rehabilitation. We local graduate. We conduct this rehabilitation services following the August 2021 earthquake.
Sorry that I had to pause there. Moline, if you can please mute your microphone. We are getting feedback from you. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me see.
Thank you.
University of
Thank you very much, James. I'm sure we can start to take any questions. I see Moline just quickly went out of this session again. So if you can enable your microphone, I will read the first uh, question for you, and then I'm sure you can answer that. Hello, Aaron, as well. You are after this session. So, James, uh, Moline is back, and she will take
Okay,
over again. Thank you.
thank you. Sorry, I'm having connection problems here. So thank you for the great presentation. I did miss part of the presentation, but it's a great program. So there is a question in the chat. Just my question is, what do you think that makes this program successful, and how do you see the sustainability of this program?
Okay, thank you for the question. I appreciate. I think the program we like Asian, we did a lot of things to do this program stay stay alive. Like it is very difficult in this moment because we have many issue like social, politic, economic, financial with many with several help, and we have like foreigner like our dean is if she's an American, she support us very a lot, and we have some organization international we support us like HIF AIDS Rehabilitation Foundation. We support many of students because our many of students in Haiti, many of students at FSIL don't have money to pay the school, but we many of us has a scholarship. Like me, I was selected because I was selected. I have a scholarship to do my study at FSIL, but they support us very a lot. I think this first is this program. It's many helps we have for the foreigner. I think so.
Okay, thanks. One more question from the chat. How is the availability of experienced and expert physiotherapists in Haiti to mentor and support the qualified professionals in the country?
Thank you for the other question. This program in 80, it's very young in 80. I think we have 6 years in 80, and we have two school in 80. We have rehabilitation, and our school is very young in 80. Is we don't have many experts in the rehabilitation in 80. I think we can countable. We we are less like 60 or 60 physical therapists for one 11 millions for the population in 80. But for the support in 80, we don't have the support the government in 80. It's a very difficult. We have a support only organization international to support rehabilitation in 80. Right now we are working to do some promotion of the rehabilitation for the population know about what physical therapists and occupational therapists do in 80. But I think it's a very new in 80, and now we are working, as I said before, to do some promotion and for rehabilitation in Haiti. I think the question is, but the answer is I think so. That's all I can say about the expert in Haiti.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question. How many of these professionals, I think that the ones that you have trained are still based in Haiti? Are there some who have immigrated? We saw one participant is already in Canada. Are there conditions on the scholarship to save your country? Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the question. But for the moment, we don't have a database to know how many professional we have in Haiti. We have a database to describe how many professional on the rehabilitation we have. Um, we have two school in Haiti, but we know after 20 2010 earthquake, we have some some rehabilitation, some physical therapists or occupational therapists who from Canada, USA to help us in Haiti. To, to help us in Haiti. Now we can say we have about 60, as I said before, 60 or 70 um people, 70 professional in the rehabilitation to deserve 11 million people in Haiti. Rehabilitation in Haiti, s- sorry, can you hear me well?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you. I said before, rehabilitation in AD is supported by many other countries like Chile, some teacher who's from in Brazil, USA, Canada. That's all the rehabilitation, not the rehabilitation do in AD, but our school, we have we have only teacher who's from Brazil, Chile, Canada, and USA who taught us. But we can, for the moment, we don't have a pro, professional who have a master degree or doctoral degree in AT who can teach in AD. I've done my study. Now I can't teach because I don't have a master degree, but I can assist a professor international. But before, we didn't have it, and a little by little we are trying to do what we can do uh to support rehabilitation like that in Haiti.
Okay. Okay, so thank you so much. I think this is a great question that you might consider monitoring your graduates, how they are doing, where they are going, their movements, and all that. That's great. So without any further delay, I would like to present our next presenter. So our next presenter is Irene. Irene is a doctor in orthopedic surgery at the Royal London Hospital in the United Kingdom. He was born in Ukraine and came to United Kingdom when he was 5. The ongoing war is a deep concern for him. So using his knowledge of trauma systems and trauma science, he has analyzed the background trends and outlook for Ukraine's healthcare and particularly trauma systems. So thank you. Over to Irene.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. Just want to figure out how to share my screen so you guys can see the presentation.
Okay.
Aaron, right next to the video, there's a little screen with a red line through it.
Yeah.
at the bottom.
Share
If you
screen.
click on that, yeah.
Right, thank you. So you guys can see the presentation, yeah?
Yes, thank you. And Marlene, if you can just mute your microphone again for us during this presentation.
So the title of the presentation is Ukrainian Trauma System Provision Through War and Peace. The objectives will be to consider the links between war and medical advances through history, and then more specifically to discuss trauma systems and their components. And then I'll just kind of talk you guys through recent history of Ukraine and how these recent wars have affected its healthcare system, particularly the trauma aspect of it, and what the future prospects for Ukraine and its healthcare system are. And then these two images you can see on the right. One is the top one is an image of soldiers stretchering away an injured soldier in World War One. And the bottom image is similar, is a group of men stretchering away a pregnant woman at a hospital that was recently bombed in Ukraine. And this woman actually, unfortunately, passed away. So it illustrates the seriousness of this issue. So war is as old as humanity. War has always been characterized by its brutality, and various injury patterns have been seen through different wars as weapons and warfare evolve. This has provided the impetus for medical healthcare, particularly trauma management. The earliest evidence of this is the Smith Papyrus, written by an unnamed ancient Egyptian military surgeon who describes various injuries and their management, including suturing wounds, splinting, fractures, and cauterization. The Romans represented the peak of the ancient world with a massive empire, military and logistics and infrastructure. They used their size and efficiency to organize a medical infrastructure for their soldiers. However, following the collapse of Rome, the world descended into the Middle Ages, otherwise known as the Dark Ages. Military forces became smaller and fragmented, and nobody was able to organize a comparable military healthcare system for centuries to come. And you see at the bottom right, just some of the surgical implements that the Romans created to operate on people. So they were quite advanced for their time. The beginnings of modern military medicine are generally considered to be the Napoleonic Wars. Dominique Jean Larrey was the chief surgeon and commander in the French military, and a close friend of Napoleon himself, who described him as the most virtuous man he ever knew. He is considered the father of military surgery. Among his innovations were purpose-built ambulances, as you can see in the top right, that could quickly take men off the battlefield, had inbuilt suspension, a foldable ramp, and an operating table. Once these ambulances carried men off the battlefield, they will be taken to a series of field hospitals, part of the medical infrastructure that Larrey installed. He also formalized the concept of triage, in other words, prioritizing more unwell patients, where previously this was often done based on the rank of the injured soldier. He was also incidentally one of the first to describe the benefits of maggot therapy in gangrenous wounds. In this era also, Florence Nightingale, a British nurse serving in the Crimean War, would later be considered the founder of modern nursing for her reforms. Pictured is a ward she designed for soldiers that she was treating during the Crimean War. Particularly since the advent of modern warfare in the 20th century, we have seen developments that have greatly impacted civilian healthcare. In the years prior to World War I, the basic science of blood, such as the ABO groups, had been discovered. Blood transfusions had been performed, but were limited to hospitals with the donor and patient side by side, and there was no way to store blood. During World War I, this budding technology was rapidly advanced. The discovery that adding sodium citrate to blood meant it could be stored meant blood banks could be established, and the first transfusion of stored blood took place during the Battle of Cambrai in France in 1917, as pictured at the top. During the later Korean and then Vietnam Wars, difficult terrain and increasing availability of helicopters spurred the development of helicopter evacuations. Evacuation time dropped from 4 hours in World War II to 85 minutes in the Korean War, all the way down to 27 minutes in the Vietnam War. Damage control, resuscitation, and surgery are concepts in modern trauma management which prioritize maintaining circulatory volume, controlling hemorrhage, performing surgery limited to controlling bleeding or contamination, preference for blood products over crystalloid solutions, and definitive surgery once physiological reserve has been improved. These concepts initially developed from the military experience of managing battlefield trauma and reflects the high-quality literature on trauma management and rehabilitation that is published from various militaries. As mentioned, with the improved evacuation of injured soldiers in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, Americans noted that an injured soldier may receive more comprehensive care, including speedy evacuation to a hospital, than a civilian. Effort was made to create a similar civilian infrastructure for trauma patients in America through the 60s and 70s. This has subsequently been replicated in other more economically developed countries, such as the UK. The London Trauma Network was established in 2010 and has subsequently expanded on a national scale. A trauma system may be defined as an organized system to provide healthcare in a defined area to patients throughout trauma, from the injury itself to the rehabilitation process, and is integrated with the local public health system. Features include transport, pre-hospital care, communication systems, and crisis management training. Localities within the trauma system are centered around a major trauma center. These are hospitals with specialists in all surgical specialties concerned with trauma, emergency care, and resuscitation, and capable of dealing with high volumes of patients, and often these hospitals have helipads and other such infrastructure. The image shows a map of England with the various trauma centres concentrated around major urban areas, including 4 in London, including the hospital I previously worked at, the Royal London Hospital. These reforms have shown measurable improvements in efficiency and outcomes in the US and UK. However, establishing such a system requires a pre-existing medical and transport infrastructure and, of course, a lot of money. So now on to Ukraine. So Ukraine declared independence from the USSR in 1991. During Soviet times, citizens were entitled to free basic healthcare, and the territories in the USSR saw industrialization, the beginnings of some public services, including healthcare, and improvements in education, research, and science. In the latter years of the USSR, the wider political system stagnated and failed to continue to improve public service and quality of life. Officially, healthcare remained free, but in reality, patients would have to pay. Following the collapse of the USSR in 1991, Ukraine suffered economic collapse, widespread corruption, and a breakdown in social order. Public services rapidly degenerated in this time, including healthcare, seeing increased costs for the patient, including relatives needing to buy and bring basic equipment for the care of their relatives to the hospital. Subsequent years have seen Ukraine's attempts at reform stifled by political infighting. The picture in the bottom right shows one of many fights amongst Ukrainian members of parliament inside the Ukrainian House of Parliament. This characterized this period where they were constantly behaving in this way. So fast forward now to 2014. In 2014, Maidan Square in central Kiev, as you see in the top right, was occupied for many weeks by protesters angered by the pro-Russian government, by the pro-Russian president's decision to not sign an association agreement with the European Union, contrary to the desire of many Ukrainians to move in a more pro-Western direction. Following the overthrow of the president, a war broke out in the eastern Donbass region in Ukraine between the Ukrainian government and the pro-Russian separatists. The war saw widespread destruction of the previously industrialized and developed Donbass region, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and the occupation of other territories in the east. However, this meant that Ukraine politically broke away from Russia decisively and was able to pursue its own agenda. Since 2015, a raft of reforms in the Ukrainian healthcare were begun. These included the establishment of emergency departments. Previously, many hospitals in Ukraine had reception areas without beds. Ukraine began formalizing the qualifications and training required of paramedics. Ukraine also began to standardize clinical guidelines nationwide, often adopting pre-made American or European guidelines. Whereas countries like US and UK, who fought wars abroad and had stronger economies, were able to convert practices such as helicopter evacuations into the civilian setting, Ukraine has not been able to do this. Indeed, an instructive example is that of a medical helicopter owned by Lviv Oblast, a mountainous region in West Ukraine. Although it had access to a helicopter for 9 years, successive failures with bureaucracy and then the inability to develop a system of staffing and maintenance meant this helicopter was never used. Ultimately, the destructive elements of the war on Ukraine's infrastructure, economy, and funding priorities far outweighed any benefits that lessons learned from the war can bring. So now, on the 24th of February this year, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which will make this war 8 months old tomorrow. In these 8 months,
you have about 4 minutes.
Sorry. I'm not too far away. In these 8 months, the Ukrainian people have been visited by unimaginable death and destruction. This is the largest war in Europe since World War II and has been characterized by the widespread use of rockets, artillery, airstrikes, and tank battles, which has led to the destruction of medical facilities, infrastructure, and staff, mass casualty events involving both soldiers and civilians, and a refugee crisis. Precise numbers are difficult to obtain as the war is still ongoing, but at least hundreds of hospitals and medical facilities have been targeted by Russians. The above image shows a hospital in East Ukraine that has been destroyed, with the patients in the middle image forced to relocate to the basement. Ukrainians have established lines of evacuation for injured soldiers, usually with emergency medics that can physically remove a patient from the front line and quickly bring them to an ambulance, usually parked on a road near the front line, who can then evacuate the soldier to a nearby field hospital. Further road and rail networks are then used to transport the injured to larger cities or indeed abroad. However, due to increasingly sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons, Ukrainians are unable to use helicopters for evacuations. Western aid has come in helpful. Ukraine's fleet of ambulances are older and less effective than those in Western Europe. However, as the bottom picture shows, the ambulances, this one in particular donated by Britain, often don't have very long lives on the front line. Although fortunately in this particular strike, nobody was injured. The short-term prospects for Ukraine remain bleak. The war is continuing with no end in sight, and many medical facilities remain destroyed with no immediate plans to repair them. In recent weeks, Russia has launched a bombing campaign targeting energy infrastructure. Around 40% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged, which will plunge the country into hardship with a cold winter fast approaching. The image on the top right shows firefighters tackling a blaze at an energy plant in the last few days. While Western military aid has been decisive in resisting Russian forces, further aid will be required in peacetime to help Ukraine rebuild healthcare infrastructure and facilities. However, with economic and political crises rife throughout Europe, nowhere more so than in my country of the United Kingdom, it remains to be seen if there will be the appetite or funds to help rebuild Ukraine after the war. The bottom image shows Ukrainian politicians displaying flags of allied countries in their House of Parliament during this war. This spirit of solidarity will need to continue after the war to help Ukraine. This is the final slide. Finally, I just wanted to conclude by saying what I think will be the most important and decisive prospect for that Ukraine has for its future healthcare system. It is not the aid that Western countries may give, nor political reforms that its politicians may provide. It will ultimately be the doctors, nurses, paramedics, ambulance drivers, and all other men and women who have bravely risked their lives to serve the Ukrainian healthcare system during this war. Despite the great personal cost, these people have worked in the hardest conditions imaginable and will have received an education that no school, university, or book can provide. The photo on the left shows a multidisciplinary team operating on a soldier in the town of Kramatorsk, only several miles from the front line, showing that even in the most dangerous areas, organized trauma care is still being provided. Not all of these doctors and nurses will live to see the other side of this war, however. The image on the right shows Oksana Leontieva, a doctor killed in an airstrike whilst driving to work a couple of weeks ago. Despite these tragedies, the healthcare workers who survived this war will one day be the people who rebuild and run the future healthcare and trauma system. And I have every confidence that my compatriots will be successful. Thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Aaron, for the insightful presentation. It's quite really traumatic, and I'm sure it's very traumatic experience. Let's look for questions for Aaron. So we have, let me see quickly. So we saw with this war innovations in warfare, such as use of drones. Did you see any innovations in terms of healthcare during this relatively short period of time?
Well, this is the unfortunate thing is, you know, where my point, part of the point in the presentation is obviously, whereas other countries like Britain and America, who when they fought wars, whether it was the Vietnam War or World War II or even World War I, where they developed blood transfusion technology, these countries had the strong economies and often were fighting wars in other countries and were able to innovate healthcare. Ukraine is basically just fighting for its survival and has not really been able to develop anything to a high standard during this war. So, for instance, helicopters, although Ukrainian military does have some evacuation medical helicopters, the risk of them being shot down is too great, and so we've not been able to innovate this particular facet of our healthcare system. Similarly, you know, I didn't want to use the stats because they get out of date so quickly, but it's several hundred hospitals and other medical facilities have been destroyed or badly damaged in this war. So I'm afraid to say that I think Ukraine is at this particular point is more trying to just survive rather than to create some sort of great innovation in healthcare. But it's just about how well they're able to use the resources that they have, which I think they are doing a good job with.
Thank you, Aaron. Another question. The presentation is emotional and a great eye-opener to the Ukraine health system and trauma care and response. In this health system trauma, what psychological trauma support is provided to health system providers working in this very difficult situation?
Well, yeah, again, this is definitely going to be a long-term issue for Ukraine, is the psychological issues that people are going to suffer, the amount of people who have lost limbs and will be disabled and will need long-term rehabilitation, a whole generation of children having not really been able to go to school for, you know, obviously with COVID and then with this war. So it's going to be a very tough process. But again, at this point in the war, where it's such a hot war, still huge areas of land being changing hands. The nuclear threat, a nuclear plant under occupation by Russia, which they're trying to, you know, they're not allowing any inspectors to check it. The war is still ongoing, and I don't think Ukrainians have had a chance to consider their mental well-being at this point. I think they're still at the point of just working as hard as they can. But again, there's just so many things that we're just having to put and deal with later, such as people's emotional well-being and psychological well-being. It's just going to be something we'll have to deal with at the end of the war, I'm afraid. Right now, it's still a very bad situation militarily.
Okay, thank you, Aaron, for the great presentation. Unfortunately, it ends us at a very sad note. Again, thanking all presenters in this session. We started looking at immigration and its impact, especially on the vulnerable population, children with disabilities. We also talked about designing a program in a low-income country, and also we're talking about war and its effect on healthcare system. That's great, very insightful presentation. We would like to thank you for the insightful presentations. And I think now we're finished, and we need now to move to our break and then viewing posters. Thank you so much. And please complete the evaluation as posted in the chat.